in a related story, Democrats want racial equity audits at tech companies. According to the Washington Free Beacon, which Sachs, correct me if I'm wrong, that's some sort of wacky right-wing publication.
Never heard of it.
Okay. Washington Free Beacon. If instituted auditors would have veto power over every product or initiative, that's not an exaggeration, is what the story says. One proposal from House Democrats would fine companies $20,000 a day for not completing biennial independent racial equity audits. A left-wing nonprofit called Color of Change is pushing for these audits. Last week, their president called for independent auditors to vet new products from tech companies before they're released in front of Congress. 2018, Color of Change successfully pushed Facebook into completing an audit. They called for more restrictions on Trump's posts. Color of Change itself pushed for Trump to be permanently banned from the platform.
Just so you know, this is exactly the rough version of what happened to Microsoft in their DOJ settlement. Their antitrust settlement was effectively an oversight where lawyers at the DOJ were the product managers and had not effectively veto right, but you had to approve product features before you could push them for 10 years. You know, this is essentially what caused Ballmer's reign to be so, ignominious. It's like he couldn't do anything because like you had a plan to do something and you'd have to go to these random folks who didn't really have the context to make a decision one way or the other on features. So, I mean, the idea that they would do this is it's pretty crazy.
I need a point of clarification here. I've heard the term racial audits or racial equity audits. My understanding of those were to understand the composure of the company in terms of, the diversity in the company. But this is something different. This is in the product to make sure the product isn't racist. Can products be racist? What's an example of a product being racist? I don't understand what they would find.
Let me unpack this for you.
Please.
Okay. What they are basically saying is that these big companies, and for example, they've called on Google to conduct one of these audits. They want all these big companies to conduct these audits. These so-called auditors are actually political consultants who are members of the Democratic Party, who are friends of the senators who are pushing for this. They're political activists.
Oh, it's a grift.
And it's partly a grift, but it's more than that because, when you conduct an audit, let's just take this word audit for a second, okay? You bring in a big 5 accounting firm and they will check your numbers according to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and make sure that the numbers are what you purported them to be. That is the purpose of an audit. And if the auditor ever says that you've done anything wrong, like you have to fix it, there's no choice. Or you can appeal to some other auditor and have them redo the work, okay, according to these generally accepted principles. With an equity audit, what exactly are the principles that are being enforced or checked here? There is no generally accepted list of equity principles that must be enforced in these companies. Basically, you have to do whatever this political activist tells you to do. I mean, it's essentially like bringing in a party commissar to now take over the company, or at least be inside the company telling the executives and officers of the company what to do. It's something that, frankly, the CCP would do.
It does feel a little like, Stasi-like. Didn't we have all of the companies on their own, from Twitter to Google to Facebook, release their own diversity stats years ago?
I think this is about more than diversity. It's about equity. So
let's explain the difference in what that means. This is somehow how the companies run, like the day-to-day life of the employees there, not just the composure and the breakdown of the employees?
Look, equity means anything that progressives say it means. We've seen on this program before how equity has jumped the shark. There's now, there's a provision in the infrastructure bill for tree equity. So, I mean, really any disparity that occurs that progressives don't like can now be called a violation of equity. And this gives them the authorization to come in there and start giving orders.
It's very weird that I don't understand how the product then review gets stopped. Is that meant to throttle you from releasing product as a punitive?
Let me give you an example. So recently, I wrote a piece called the no buy list, where you had companies like PayPal and some of these other financial firms were starting to deny service to customers, to users, based on their political affiliations, and not just like people who are in, well-known hate groups that like everybody sort of, eschews and wants to stay away from. But these are people with relatively down the middle conservative groups, and they were being denied service by, fintech firms. So now I'm not saying that this is what this means, but if this equity auditor tells you, well, look, I don't think it's equitable to allow these conservative groups to be a user of your product. Well, what's the company going to do? They're going to have to listen to that. And that is a plausible scenario given that it's already occurred.
We've said this so many times on the pod, but I just want to say it again because I guess a lot of folks are new and listening. Whenever you hear equity used by a politician, it usually means there's a power grab involved.
Yeah.
Because if you really want things to be fair, you want things to be equal.
Meritocracy. Right?
You want equality. But whenever you start throwing the word equity around and say we want racial equity, it's a bunch of, a small number of people who, basically have and live by what's often called luxury beliefs, who want to judge other people, who want to be morally absolutist, and then who want to basically exercise a power grab. And we have to push back on that stuff because it's just a slippery slope.
Well, this also seems like overbearing red tape for companies. I mean, if the company has no problems, no complaints against it, releases their diversity numbers, like what is the point of going in there and auditing them?
Let's use an example that builds on what David said. Let's take Square. Okay, one of the most incredible things that Square did was in a hackathon essentially build a Cash App.
Yeah.
And one of the most incredible things that happened in the Cash App was that it really started to blow up in urban communities. Okay. Yep. And it starts to normalize banking, opening up bank accounts, having more savings, understanding, an on-ramp into crypto. Cash App has probably done more to get Black and brown people into crypto and to save money and to understand their cash than almost anybody else as like a 100%. Almost explicit strategy. And so is somebody supposed to go in there and just, arbitrarily judge whether there's too many white people that work at Square or not enough Black people? And so XYZ thing has to change, or such and such a feature doesn't actually speak to folks, so you can't do it. It's insanity. It's like,
well, also to your point, Sachs, is what do these people know? Like, what is their qualification and what's the goal?
Right. And to build on Chamath's point, if these senators, so I think Cory Booker was the one who proposed this, if these senators want those specific policies implemented in the Fortune 500, let them pass a bill to do it and let all of our elected representatives vote on that bill. Mm-hmm. And then we can see if it's popular enough to pass and whether it passes constitutional muster. They won't do that because these bills, if they were directly concretized in the form of proposals, would be very unpopular. So instead what they do is tell you, well, we're not going to do this directly. We're going to put pressure on these big companies to hire one of our political friends, again, this like commissar-like person, and empower them to tell these companies what to do. So it's really kind of insidious what they're doing. And they're kind of covering it all up with these nice sounding names. I mean, who could be against a racial equity audit, right? Because
racists.
Yes, if you're against it, you're must be a racist and you must not believe in auditing companies.
Right.
So there's this word game.
It's a word game. It's using words that are really loaded and mean a lot to a lot of us, right? If I hear racism and race, my ears perk up. Yeah. It's not triggering, but my ears perk up, and I have a lot of inbuilt opinions on it that have been governed by 45 years as living as a brown man. And so, okay, it stands to reason that I'm going to pay attention. But on the surface, if you say racial equity audit, it also doesn't seem actually all that bad. It seems like reasonably benign, and that seems like an okay thing to do. It's just that most of us then stop at that point and move on.
Right.
But if you actually look at the rules, again, I would just say whenever political frameworks use the word, we need to create more equity, the outcomes are horrible. For example, look in healthcare. We have used this idea of healthcare equity, health equity, and we've misused it to such a degree. And all we see is that now the system is so perverted, it also doesn't work for the majority of people that have actually had the healthcare system work for it, right? Like at the top of the pecking order has always been white men, have always gotten the best care. And we've always measured our healthcare progress in America based on the longevity of men, white men, 78, 79, 80 years old. And then it started to degrade and people were curious what was happening. And underneath it all was just a bunch of power grabs. Under the realm of equity, we passed all these crazy laws. We basically didn't do anything to really create more accountability and a cost-based system. And here we are. So at some point, when the citizenry hears that word, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on and actually take the opposite view, which is, hold on, this is a really nice sounding word. It may not be what I think it is, and I got to pay attention, because more than if I didn't hear the word at all.
Anything you have on race, Friedberg, representing South Africans.
Fundamentally, I don't think this is about race, Jake. I think this is about power.
Power.
It's a power grab. It feels like a power grab. Also, it feels like a little bit of a grift. I know I had heard on the back channel that a lot of the people who are criticizing some big tech companies who were getting, I'm not going to say who or under what moniker.
Sweater Karen?
Not Sweater Karen, but there was a group of people who are like attacking big
Sweater
tech.
Karen, if she has an opinion on sweater, she must have an opinion on racial equity. Come on.
Okay, leave Sweater Karen as. The issue is they would complain and create these, basically, Twitter mobs. And then they'd say, oh, yeah, and hire us for $20,000. We'll come in and fix the problem for you. So they were creating the Twitter mob to then come in and solve the problem.
That's so brutal.
And I was like, oh, wow, that's
so brutal. That's so dirty.
No, I mean, these HR consultants who've written these books, like on D'Angelo or whatever on white fragility and how to be an anti-racist. I mean, they're all making a fortune in corporate fees, charging $20,000, $30,000 per gig. I mean, it is absolutely a racket.
I'm not a fan of equality of outcome. I'm more a fan of equality of opportunity. And I think many of these sorts of folks, I try and identify methods to drive equality of outcome. And it inhibits the competitive forces that cause the best person, the best idea, the best business, the best market model to win. And, I think it's easy to conflate the two when you don't really think through it, but it is certainly appropriate and reasonable to make sure that folks aren't discriminated against when they apply for a job. I don't think it's appropriate to then apply considerations of race and other factors when people are equally in the same job on who gets to have the chance at the bonus. It is the best performer that should have the chance at the bonus. And the same should be true in marketplaces, and the same should be true with business. And I think that what we're really seeing is this fundamental effort to try and generate equality in outcomes in lots of different manifestations. And we're seeing it more frequently and more severely than we've seen it historically. But it's not, I don't think it's the right model, and it's only going to lead to demise of marketplace dynamics and the things that cause forces for success and progress to win.
We mentioned this a couple of times. I'll just say it again. But we are about to have probably the most significant movement and questioning of equity versus equality. Because I think in the next month, or maybe in the next 2 months, we're going to sort of see a pretty strict opinion on affirmative action. And if you talk to legal scholars, the overwhelming consensus is this is gone. We're going to have to figure out how to rebuild what was a really important system that tried to give folks at least, getting to the starting line in the same way. But it's not really going to exist in the same way, shape, or form.